A listener reached out to me and wanted to talk about how people should think about marketing, giving all the uncertainty around tariffs and so on that are happening. And I called Elizabeth Schaub, and she said, Hamid just did a report, and let's get together. And Hamid was nice enough to invite us all here to Boulder to have a face to face conversation. So if you haven't met my friends, this is Elizabeth Schaub. She's the CEO of High Touch Group and the author of The Giant's Ladder. And my other guest is my good friend Hamid Ganadan, who is the author of Persuading Scientists and Catalytic Experiences. Thank you. And so we're going to do a webinar. We're going to have Q&A at the end. We're going to start with just kind of laying out the landscape of the things that are going on right now that might affect how you think about your business in life science. And then we're going to go into a little bit of specifically how you should think about marketing in the next half of the year, for example, and of course, longer term, and then other implications of all the things that are happening to, plan for your business in the longer run. So why don't I start with Elizabeth? Tell us what you've been seeing, what you hear, what you think about.
That's a huge question.
Yeah, but I know you've got it. I know you have it.
Yeah, right, all right. Well, I think one of the most important things that I'm talking about a lot with my clients, but also just in general, because we're all in this ecosystem. So we have colleagues and longtime friends that are being affected on almost a daily basis by federal funding cuts. We've seen reporting this week from Fierce that we've seen over $1.8 billion worth of cuts just to the NIH. That's over 684 grant programs that have just been cut, just completely wiped. And that means that that innovation pipeline that starts with basic research, that continues into preclinical, translational, and so on, we're just kneecapping it, right? So those innovations that we as consumers might see in healthcare in 10, 15, 20, 25 years, those are being handicapped. And we're not going to see those in the US if the pace of federal funding cuts continues as it is. The other thing we're seeing, which is kind of interesting, countries like France, Germany, Singapore, China, inviting our researchers to go set up labs there. They're going to fully fund their labs, let their PIs come with them. And that to me is just a massive talent drain from our country. So if our academic institutions and research labs are being kneecapped and not getting the funding they need to fund the PIs, postdocs, grad students, and so on in those labs. And those lead researchers, literally the best of the best in our country, are being sucked up by these other countries. This is a massive geopolitical issue. And it's, of course, going to hamper innovation in our country long term. So there are obviously near-term implications for our clients as well, and for the life science industry more generally. But I think that innovation pipeline and the damage we're doing is pretty systemic, and we're not it's a slow burn, right? We're not necessarily going to see every impact next month. We're going to see it in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And that to me is it's just like nothing I've ever seen, because of course I came up the research ranks at a time when research was very well funded, and the same thing over the last 10, 15 years. All of us have benefited from an incredible research and ecosystem in our country, and I just don't think we're going to see that for the next 4 to 8 years likely.
Yeah, we don't see things right when the initiator happens. The cycle is long.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on what you said, which is this idea that things aren't going to happen right now. And I've been having some conversations with people in the investment community, both VC and private equity. And the sentiment is the same, is that if you look at the fundamentals of the economy, everything looks strong in the long term, right? I mean, even with all of these changes, the stock market hasn't crashed and things like, we're all kind of, waiting with bated breath, but that's actually the problem. The long term, we'll figure it out. Everything's fine. Midterm, even, we'll figure it out. Everything's fine. Immediate term, everyone's frozen. No one knows what to do. So this actually translates to like people in marketing, people in sales, people in all aspects of the business, because they can't rely on anything to even bet on to move forward. So that's the piece that I think is really critical. We've done 3 studies since the beginning of the year. The first one was our semi-annual State of Science. So this actually, all the data was taken before the inauguration of the current administration. And even then, the sentiment was fairly mixed on this, right? There was definitely a trepidation that federal funding was going to be affected, that maybe even the global economy was going to be affected. And so what we ended up seeing was that academia at the time was really forecasting a 10% cut in their budget. And biopharma in general, which we call pharma, biopharma, biotech, anything that's sort of non-industrial biotech, was looking at an average of 2% budget increase in their overall budget. But if you put that in relief of the inflation rates, that's actually a reduction in budgets as well. So we were already going into the year with reduction. However, the consumer sentiment was actually strong. And how we measure consumer sentiment is how likely people feel that they're going to meet their goals for the year. That's consumer sentiment in the life sciences. Like, I set these goals, I'm certain I'm going to meet them. And it was an average of 68%, which is actually pretty high. We've been measuring this for several years. So that was the sort of the setup. And then obviously in February, there was the first budget cut into the NIH through indirect funding. So we did a report on that. And of course, the vast majority of people believed that they were going to get negatively affected by this. There was a small minority that was actually thinking that it was going to benefit them. And that was going to mean that they were going to be more competitive, that they were going to look for other types of funding. But the sentiment that we heard there is it was actually an opportunity to reset and to look at getting rid of some of the ways that, basically the sort of the research funding complex wasn't working. So again, minority, I don't want to give them too much of a voice, but they were there. And then the tariffs. And so we did a third report about the effects of the tariffs, and that one was global, and it was looking at both academia and biotech. As I'm sure you can imagine, academia was more negative on what was going to happen. And there was really 4 things that they were really worried about. Number 1 was access to technology. Number 2 was technology and capabilities. The second one was just their budgets and their capabilities shrinking as a result of all this, prices going up. But then there was also a subgroup that actually was worried about the availability and lead times to get the things that they need, and then the security and reliability of supply. And so I don't know if this was a tannic taste in their mouth from the COVID supply chain issues, but there was a large portion of 63% of the people said, this is something I'm worried about as well. And so when you put all these things together, that's what's causing this sort of freeze moment that we're seeing right now. So that's how I see setting the stage as to where we are in like mid-May of 2025.
And it's a huge freeze moment, because if you don't know what's going to happen to your product that either it's your product or product that you've ordered that's somewhere in the middle of the ocean, and when it docks in your ports, you may or may not get hit by a tariff of 145%, or maybe it's going to be 10% or 25 or 45. It creates just this chaos situation. Yeah. And so I see the ghosting, I see the frozen, and it's a tough environment, I think, for a lot of C-levels who are trying to navigate right now.
Absolutely.
Are there other overlooked consequences of those cuts? Have we covered them here, or other things people should be thinking about?
I think the talent drain is one that it's going to take a little while for us to see the impact, but it's going to be huge, because our people are our power really in our country. We have such brilliant scientific power in this country, and it's a massive geopolitical issue for us, I think, that is completely overlooked, or at least it's not getting the attention. I've seen very little press coverage, and the articles that I'm seeing around France's program, Germany's program, China's program, they're so light in the details, but there are so many researchers who are applying actively to them because they're easier to apply for than a lot of the NIH programs. And if you have a little bit more security for your lab, for your research, for your team, I think that's going to be a huge impact to our entire research ecosystem that we're not going to see for a decade.
point in fact, back in February when we did our NIH report, 18% of the people that responded to our survey said that one of the things that they're considering up to top three is really looking for another job.
Wow.
And so whether that's leaving academia altogether, whether that's going into industry or moving geography. So 18% is not an insignificant number,
No.
right? And if that is representative of the whole community, that's 1 in 5 academic, 1 in 5 researcher. So we can talk about the long-term implications. I think the other sort of more tactical implications that we saw when we parsed the numbers as to who was feeling like they were more or less frozen, as it were, you really look at the cash cushion that these companies have. And I actually want to talk about that. I actually want to talk about the fact that the NIH budget is still in the multiple tens of billions of dollars. So this our collective market isn't drying up. It's still relatively large. Now, was it as large as it was yesterday? No, right? $1.8 billion is not an insignificant amount of money. And also there is still investment going into pharma and biotech. And, and there's a lot of doom and gloom about the pharma and biotech drug pricing and things like that, but there are scenarios where it's going to be a win-win. So we'll see if those scenarios come into fruition, but we don't see that pharma and biotech are really pulling back to zero by any means. So there is still a vibrant multi-hundreds of billions of dollars in the life sciences, industry. It's shifting so fast and it's getting concentrated. So the VC community that I spoke with, they are much more likely to fund a company with more money and pick a winner than to spread their risk across multiple companies that are maybe earlier on. So less early on and more just putting your bets behind something that's a little bit more certain. To your point, Elizabeth, I think that's again curbing early stage innovation, which I think is absolutely, you're right about that. But in in 2025, 2026, there's still money, there's still deals, there's still research, there's still, product pipelines. It's just not what we thought it was. And I think a lot of us can't feel the certainty to say it's still going to be there tomorrow.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So people are moving, Germany, France, perhaps, and China.
and Saudi Arabia and the UAE, I wouldn't discount those two countries as well, because they have a lot of money. They're tech enthusiasts. They love technology.
Oh, KSA, those cities, they're entire cities built around innovation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they're actually in even more of a time crunch because of the changing environment, right? So if a particular city, let's say Riyadh, is going to be 130 degrees Fahrenheit on a daily basis, they need to fix that, right? They absolutely need to fix that. And so and they have the money and the resources to do something about it. So I wouldn't discount those as being the next tech innovation superpowers. I think a lot of us are worried about China, but if you listen to at least some geopolitical people, China is already peaked in certain ways because they're aging out of the workforce, right? Their population is going to decrease significantly very quickly. And so some people are saying China's day is over. I don't know that I agree with that. I think there's still a lot of innovation that's happening. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah.
Are you talking about Peter Zion specifically?
I am talking about Peter Zion.
For anybody who wants to learn a little bit more.
Yeah.
But whatever I was going with that is not just people leaving, but people who were considering careers in science who are now looking and going, well, I don't know, right? If this is the thing I want to do.
If you're listening, don't let it change your trajectory. Please
Yeah,
keep going with that career. We need you.
What she
Yes.
said.
Yeah.
What she said.
I'll
Absolutely.
counterpoint on China just a moment because I think it's an important one, and it's a country that I've spent a lot of time in, and I'm constantly blown away by the level of innovation in people's daily lives. They were some of the before we had a lot of cashless payment systems in the U.S. Everything there was cashless. Everything there is on your phone. Everything's controlled by WeChat. iPad and all these different apps, just massive app infrastructure. And, say what you will on, government and all of that. But when a lot of what the government policy over the last 50 years has been about population control, right? And with a smaller population, they're going to have more funding to really pick and choose the winners in that society. And that means more strategic investment in certain areas, whether we're talking about climate change, space tech. I mean, I know we're just talking about life sciences today, but space mining, advanced materials, I mean, they control the majority of rare earth and platinum group metals. And they're looking for ways that we can extract more in asteroids and the moon, and taking a lot of this stuff much more seriously than a lot of the venture and private equity community is in the United States. And so I do think that watching China is going to continue to be a really important factor for life sciences, as well as just more generally innovation in the US and globally.
Yeah.
You highlighted a few things from your surveys. Is there more to talk about that you want to dive into?
To be honest, there's too much.
Too much.
There's a lot. I would say generally speaking, the way that scientists and companies outside of the U.S. are thinking about how to deal with this is starkly different than the ones in the U.S. In the U.S., our survey showed that they're really reprioritizing. So again, if you're in the drug if you're in somewhere in the drug pipeline, really picking your winners and getting it as far down that pipeline as quickly, and maybe not not prioritizing the early stage things. But there are companies who have a ton of money, and they are actually pushing in all fronts. And so there's that. Outside of the US, for example, they were looking for suppliers. So in the US, they're looking at, okay, how do I reduce my budget? How do I prioritize? How do I get more for less? Outside of the US, they were saying, how do I find a local manufacturer so that I can get that security of supply, and I can, maybe not be affected by the global trade war or tariffs or anything like that, or just even disruptions. And so there was that major difference. And then, as I'm sure many of our listeners who are in the commercial space know, and executives know, really getting into market is a completely different equation, whether you're thinking about China, US, or the UAE. I mean, they just the dynamics, the culture, how you get the ear of someone, how you build trust, all of those are very different. And we still live in a globally diverse world. And so companies are basically coming to terms with that. Is that how do they actually shift their strategies to commercialize? Where the US was just almost like it was like you never even thought about it. It was just something you took for granted, that this was your largest market, that it was going to continue growing, that it was going to be continuing to fund it. And I think that everything that I'm learning in the scenario plannings that we're doing is you can't take anything for granted anymore. And that's a scenario planner's dream. Like, you actually should question things that you've been taking for granted.
Absolutely.
But now it's like staring at us in the face.
Absolutely.
We're going to come back to that for sure. I want to ask you again about, because Brian McNally was nice enough to send a question through LinkedIn, and I want to reward people who
Thank you, Brian.
follow the instructions. Anyway, and everybody's welcome to send questions to the Q&A. I'd love to have that happen. But he was asking about, he said, Commissioner Makary said there would be some consolidation of shared services within the FDA, and there was some similar suggested consolidation at the NIH, i.e. fewer institutes. Do you think that there will be an impact on science of having fewer institutes if that happens? And what would it be?
Yeah, and we were discussing this a little bit before we started. My comparative here is academia. I came from an academic lab originally, and then I worked in academia for a number of years. And anybody here who's listening and is in that environment probably has had a similar experience, that core services often add significant wait times to your project schedule. You get hit with delays. They can't fit you in for various services that you need. IT in academic institutions often isn't really meant to scale the way that it does, or they don't understand the specifics of, your lab's LIMS, for example, and often can gate purchases of important technology because, they don't understand exactly, what it is that you're looking for in your lab. And you see this sort of across services, in academia. And so NIH is obviously much larger than this. But if we're looking at it just as where can we gain some efficiencies, I would offer the counterpoint of what are we losing by not allowing specific institutes to run these, whether we're talking about core functions or we're talking about IT, travel, other administrative functions, run it themselves. I mean, we're losing a lot there. And I don't think that efficiency is necessarily the metric that we want to use for judging our basic science and how successful our basic science programs are. It's not a commercial endeavor at that point where we need to be thinking about, CAC and ROI constantly. Basic research should be about encouraging exploration, encouraging going down these meandering paths, because that's how we make discoveries. We don't make discoveries because exactly what we put down on paper is going to be exactly how it pans out. And there are so many different examples of this. I mean, we were talking about PCR earlier. That's a great example. If you look at really the beginning of anything, GPS, GIS, any of these technologies that we take for granted, they didn't come out of somebody's textbook idea that they put on paper at a grant application and then the research program just kind of went off without a hitch. All of these start typically with a completely left field idea, concept, key finding, and you're not going to get that by trying to make the NIH increasingly more efficient from a cost perspective. There are other metrics that we could certainly be looking at within the NIH, but I don't think that spend efficiency is my first choice metric for making that organization more effective. Effectiveness and metrics of effectiveness are typically much more, I think, they have the ability to drive innovation forward, whereas efficiency metrics often kind of stranglehold innovation. And there's a time for those, especially when you're spending VC capital, right, or your private equity capital, right. That's when you're starting to be a lot more efficient with your spend. But we can't always take these commercial metrics and apply them to the non-commercial innovation sector. It's just a way of kneecapping us. It's not a way to really drive progress.
Yeah.
I'd love to. I know you had a great point in this earlier too.
Yeah, I mean, so I agree with everything that you said, and I think that this is what is really going to, if it was to go in that direction, then you're going to have generalists that are looking at very specific grants and specific disciplines. But if you actually think about biology, there's very little that we understand about the totality of biology, and so we're actually still today investigating biology through these very specific lenses, whether it's infectious disease, cancer, metabolic disease, neurology, like all of the different disciplines. And so that's why there actually needs to be these specific institutes within the NIH, because that's how we're interacting with the biology itself. And so until we have a full 360-degree view of biology, or if we just completely change the research paradigm to say, okay, we're consolidating this and our goal is to get that 360-degree view of biology. Like that could be an outcome, right? I have no idea, but that could be an outcome. But until we get there, we need a lens through which we're interacting with this thing. And these institutes are our way of interacting with those. So.
And cross collaboration between institutes is really powerful. And to get that 360-degree view of biology, we of course need that. And what I hate to see happen is this desire for spend efficiency to not drive that, because that's just looking at dollars. It's not there are no metrics around that effectiveness, right? And that's where I think we could see a seismic shift, but not like this. This isn't the right way.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
It brings to mind, and then I see the questions from Joan and Owen. I do appreciate those, and I want to talk about people handling their budgets. I recently had a conversation with a friend about things that are difficult to measure. And he brought up a number of things, but he said, if you looked at USAID, for example, and I know this is out of the life sciences, and he said, you take any one thing that they're doing and you say, is it worth what we spent there? The answer may always be no, and because a lot of those things take a long time, they say, what was the benefit of putting up that school or sending food over here? And it doesn't necessarily have an immediate payoff, but it allows us to do things in the future with people that we have cooperated with to do things. And it turns out that USAID spends 0.3% of the US budget. I mean, it's a tiny fraction for the benefits that we will reap, essentially planting seeds so we can sit under the shade years from now. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about budgets and how to think about business and marketing in the near term, given the uncertainties. So if you are at a company or in a lab and someone says, we need to cut back on spending, where should that happen?
First.
Yeah, so I'll share with you what my team and I are seeing. So first of all, I think several companies are taking this as an opportunity to really get down to what works and what doesn't. And I've been really pleasantly surprised at how many executives are taking a broader and a longer view than I would have expected. I would have expected that efficiency conversation to say shut down anything that's not like, point A to point B in that lane. If I don't see the ROI in that swim lane, then it's paused. There are companies that are doing that for sure. But the clients that we've been working with are actually asking themselves, is this an opportunity to actually envision the commercial function of the future? And so we're doing a lot of pilot programs, in fact, where they're giving us some money and saying, okay, take all those assumptions aside and look at this. And so the first question that we ask is, and this is a thought exercise, if you had $1 million right now, what is your gut instinct of where you would put that? Is it in sales? Is it in marketing? Is it in service? Is it, wherever? And that's a really telling thought exercise, because then they can, then they're starting to articulate where they see their value. But really it's, we say sales and marketing, right? And the part that we focus on, or again, this is a orthodoxy that we just come to believe that it's true. It's like marketing does this, sales does this. It's the and. That's the problem. It's the sales and marketing. No one is focusing on the and. And you know how many times in some companies I see that there's just like marketing comes up and it's just like this tidal wave, and then sales comes up as this tidal wave, and you create this giant splash, and there's a lot of inefficiency there. And so we're finding some really beautiful through lines between those. And I'll tell you, it's our clients that are pulling us there. Like, I didn't come up with this. My team didn't come up with this. It was, we would, clients come to us and they say, we have this problem, and we give them a proposal, and they're like, yes on the strategy, yes on the market research, no on this traditional marketing program, yes on sales enablement. Mm-hmm. And by sales enablement, a lot of times they mean training, retraining, empowering sales to be their own sort of hunter-gatherers, so that, instead of thinking about every customer being a market of one, you think of every salesperson being a sort of a farmer of one. And those are starting to be effective. And so we're seeing this, and we're taking copious notes about what could happen in the future. That's the best use of budgets that I've seen, because it's not only producing results that are out of the norm, but also it's giving them a postcard from the future, so to speak, about how they want to evolve their systems. I mean, the whole content marketing stacks that like Eloqua or whatever, no disrespect to any of those companies, but they've enslaved so many marketers and so many salespeople in this machinery of just like create this, and they're not really producing the promise that they had given. It's time to unplug those, because they're just wasting money now, And so So that's a lot of what we're seeing, and that's my recommendation for what to do is just like rethink. What are your thoughts?
No,
on
I love that. And I agree with all of it. I think on the content marketing side, brands are built in times of market contraction, not in bull markets. So if you are a power, if you believe that your brands could be a powerhouse in the space that you occupy or want to occupy, this is your time to stake out that thought leadership position. So don't go dark. Just maybe don't buy so many PPC ads, right? There are really great ways to still be effective with marketing spend. And I think a big one is in the content space, but not in these like blogs that are just awful and newsletter after newsletter that's just nothing. I think this depth of educational and thought leadership based content is so important. So if you can solve, you mentioned sales, so in sales enablement, which is so important. So let's say that you're in marketing, rather than developing another newsletter that's just a bunch of blah about your company, or another blog about something that's not really affecting your market, thinking about how your products and services solve very specific problems for your customer set, focusing on those segments that still have budget and likely still will, obviously be smart about your segmentation, but develop resources that are going to help them. Because even if they can't afford to buy, your piece of equipment right today, it doesn't mean they won't be able to 6, 9, 12 months from now when maybe budgets are a little bit more liquid. And I think that if you are building those relationships of trust right now, that's going to mean sales in 12 months. It might not mean, and sales, we're used to in life sciences, we're used to these long sales cycles anyway, right? So this might be a slightly longer sales cycle than some companies might be used to, but you can stake out your thought leadership position. You can stake out that educational territory right now for your brands. This is the time to do that. So investing in good quality content written by your experts, written by your PhDs, not junk, is really important. And and this is a shout out to all the marketers too, who are deeply invested in the science that their companies are responsible for and understand it at more than just the keyword level, right? This is a time really when those marketers, I think, are going to outshine the rest, because right now it's not quite as important if you understand how Facebook's algorithm works or LinkedIn's algorithm works. It's much more important for you to understand at least a bit of the science of what the company is doing. And if you don't, then it's going to be very obvious very quickly, and you're not going to be of value to your organization.
Interesting. I just had a conversation yesterday on a podcast interview about being entrapped in those marketing automation systems. I want to go back to your point, just to be clear, that what you think was the best use of their spend was to do some experimentation around commercialization. Did I catch that right?
Yeah. So yeah, I would actually say that that's absolutely correct. Look, the way that a commercial strategy is usually developed, and this I'm not poking into any fault here, it's just the way that it is. When a company is ready to commercialize, the first thing to do is hire some people who then hire other people. And then those people, then they need systems, right, to get it all done. And then they come up with processes. That's sort of the step, right? The piece that, and I love what you said about branding, because I completely agree. This is, so I do running and I do road biking, and you never win a race on the downhill because everyone's flying, right? You win it on the uphill when everyone's just kind of falling apart, right? And that's precisely what you just said. So that's, I think the time we are seeing, I'm gonna look at the camera. We are seeing tomorrow's leaders emerge today. That's the bottom line. The companies that are really putting on the gas today will be tomorrow's leaders. That's just no two ways about that. And I think that if we were to say, you know what, we can't really rely on fundamentals right now because we don't know what the fundamentals are, then there's a chance for us to question everything that we're doing that's just sort of status quo. Because the bottom line, and I totally agree with you, the total number, the numerator is decreased. And so you can't really rely on the metrics that you're used to from Facebook ads, PPC ads, whatever. There's just not that many eyeballs. You need to create real, authentic connection. Thought leadership is the key, right?
Yes.
And how do you do that? I was just talking to, so I was working with a group, and I said, what do you want? what is it that you really want? And they're like, I want the customer to respond to me, right? And so I'm like, okay, why are you writing a blog and pushing it through Eloqua or whatever, and then asking them to click so that they can then schedule a meeting so that you can respond to them? Like, that's 5 steps. Just send them an email.
I'm going to jump in right here. So Joan Boyce asked this question. I think it's relevant to what you're talking about
Joan.
right now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joan. Joan has a lot of questions. I hope we'll get to some of them. Given the current uncertainty and strain many scientists and labs are experiencing, how should empathy shape our short-term marketing
that's
strategies and messaging? Is it possible to be both empathetic and effective in driving business outcomes right now?
Absolutely. It's the only way.
It's the only way. So here's one example that came out from the NIH report that we did. Scientists were basically saying, look, our communications are getting hit, our ability to go to conferences are getting hit, our shared services are getting hit. And let's be real here. I don't think that academic institutions are some shining example for like, for efficiency or communications or anything anyway. But companies are. And why aren't we extending those services on the behalf of scientists? Every company, even as smallest company, has a way of creating value on behalf of the scientists and academics. So one of the best ways to get somebody to say yes to you is to create a sense of reciprocity, right? The two of you are kind enough to fly here. You flew here internationally, right? To have this conversation.
Absolutely.
I just drove 8 miles from my house. I feel in my brain somewhere that I'm indebted to you. And so the next time you actually call me for something, I am much more likely to say yes.
So next
if
time
you
we'll
hadn't
do
done
this in
this.
Guadalajara, right? Okay.
Which,
good.
I mean, who's any in opposition?
Let's go.
No,
Yeah.
right? But really, like that is, and now is the time you build that brand by creating that reciprocity, rather than just like, how do I sell my stuff? The stuff will sell, right? If you go about it counterintuitively than the way that our commercial world is sort of normalized into thinking push, push, push.
Less transactional, more
Yeah, I
relationship.
want to throw in just not, I always say, don't talk about the product. Like people, they will get there, right? If you have something interesting to say, if you have a unique way of thinking about things, and how you think about things is possibly the most attractive thing that you can put out there to make people go, oh, wow, I like the way Elizabeth said that, or I like the way Hamid framed this problem. It's the same for your scientific products. Like, this is how we think about doing this type of analysis, or why the old way isn't what it could be.
Yeah. There is
And there's the human, it's coming out of a human's mouth.
Absolutely.
Is what I'm really saying.
absolutely. And I'm not here to like sugarcoat what's going on, right? But I was at AACR 2 weeks ago, and I went, booth by booth, and of course everyone was uncertain, right? That was just kind of the state of being. But then I asked, how did Q1 end? And a lot of the people are like, surprisingly actually good. Like, we kind of blew it out of the water. I mean, I had 2 clients who were like, we blew it out of the water. And a couple of other clients were like, we actually like hit it. And, it was touch and go, but we hit it. So commerce is happening. Transactions are happening. Things are moving. Again, I don't want to just focus on the loss.
Right.
I want to focus on that there is still activity. And the opportunity, in my mind, is to get much more efficient and to reinvent. So my whole thing is every part of your business requires innovation. And that is no less true than it is in sales and marketing. And I'm not talking about buying Eloqua or adopting AI. That's using innovation. That's not being innovative. And now it's like, you can't not innovate now. And so I find that, again, it's a terrible forcing function, but it's one nonetheless.
I don't know if it's terrible. I think in a lot of ways it can be market correcting. I mean, there are a lot of, I'll just pick on reagents companies for a moment. There are a lot of companies that just aren't worth their value on paper. They have messy balance sheets. They're poorly managed. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of those companies just go away. They're just going to go away. And that's going to be, upsetting. There's going to be job loss, but it also means that there's talent that companies can suck up. I mean, think about all of those unemployed researchers right now who aren't unemployed because they're not brilliant, but that is a huge opportunity for the startup ecosystem in our country and for larger companies as well that have the funding to harness that talent today. And so I think there are silver linings and opportunities, but I think it does require taking advantage of more traditional business strategy thinking, and not really the like marketing metrics and sales metrics that a lot of sales and marketing professionals have been using for the last decade. This, we talk a lot about, you were talking a lot about Eloqua. My biggest bear right now sometimes is with CRM management and just how different teams are utilizing it and running all of their business interactions out of CRM, as opposed to focusing on those interpersonal relationships with prospective clients. You're going to get so many more sales if you have that trust relationship that you've built over the last 12 months and you continue it for the next 12, even if they're not buying. That's how you keep people from ghosting on you. That's how you keep those, when we talk about frozen conversations, very often it's frozen. Nobody's getting back to you. You don't even know what the status is, right? So a lot of sales teams are struggling right now just to get those responses back from people who they had good relationships with, rather than trying to figure out, where is that deal? What is the status of that deal? How can you help? And really focusing in on what value does your company provide to that prospective client beyond that transactional sale. Because if you're selling laboratory equipment, you have so much information in your company that can help these labs. And giving that information for free is going to build more relationships than, just kind of knocking on the door when the money comes back. And I think that we really need to be thinking about relationships and empathy a lot more.
I love it. All right. So you mentioned possibly, consumables companies, some of them going away and talent being out there. So this might be a contrary opinion or not an opinion, but Owen has asked, a lot of the discussion is sort of assuming that the US has the optimal number of PhDs or did so in January. Could you comment on whether the life science sector is overskilled and whether some of that research or much of it could be done by less educated workers?
I do think that in academia, there tends, and this is actually why one of the reasons I left academia. I don't have a PhD, so I was never going to run a lab, right? And I think that there is this idea that in order to be quote unquote relevant, even within industry organizations, within the life sciences or so on, that you do have to run a lab, that you have to have a needed to spin a company out. I see a lot of brilliant minds from an academic perspective being very innovative within their own laboratories, but falling on their faces when it comes to transitioning out of a lab into pilot manufacturing or any sort of commercial context for their product or service. So I don't think that there are too many PhDs. I think that that's an overgeneralization. We probably have too few, especially in the humanities these days, especially if we're trying to benchmark ourselves geopolitically and look at other countries and PhD per capita. But I do think that there is this idea that you must be a PhD in order to be relevant, and that I don't agree with. I feel relevant. I don't. Do you have a PhD? Elliot?
I don't.
Okay, do you have a PhD?
No.
Okay, and you guys are all listening to us, so so I don't think you need to be a PhD to be relevant. I do think, just putting my venture capital hat on for a moment, I do think that when I'm in a room with a founding team, I do want to hear from somebody who's knowledgeable about the technology that I'm supposedly investing in, right? And sometimes that does seem more impressive when it comes from a PhD because they've been studying this corner of the universe for, 2 decades or whatever. But that doesn't mean that they can keep a clean balance sheet. And right now in this market, that honestly, brand and balance sheet and talent, I think, are going to be so critical, and not necessarily how many letters you have after your name. I don't know if you disagree.
No, actually. So here's something that is going to be very strange to hear given the moment that we're in. We're actually staring at a talent gap. Like we're staring at a precipice of talent gap. This is my belief, and again, it's shaped by people like Peter Zeihan and other geopolitical analysts. There is not going to be enough human beings to fill the jobs that we need to fill. That's just the bottom line. I think, and the bottom line is it's actually that is going to be exacerbated by, not negated by AI. AI is actually going to create a lot more opportunities for people to feel a sense of purpose and to participate in that. Now, again, it's sort of like you're freezing right now, and I'm telling you it's 110 degrees outside, right? Because that is the moment that we're in. But if you zoom out just beyond 2025, you look at the balance of the 2020s into the 2030s, that's really what's happening. So, and to your point, it takes a long time to get that pedigree, and the pedigree by itself isn't important. Now, in my opinion, AI also has an opportunity to create training much more so and much more immediately than it has the opportunity to create like marketing material, right? And so there is an opportunity for people who don't have the traditional pedigree to come in and fulfill that purpose and fulfill that need. So I think maybe in the immediate term, as in like the next 6 months, there's a surplus of people, but that's just a moment. I think if you look at it beyond that, I think no, I think we're not overstaffed.
Yeah, especially if we consider some of our best talent moving overseas. I think we're going to have both of those two things happening at the same time. And what does that mean in 5 to 10 years for us?
Yeah.
I'm going to take a swing as a first-time webinar host because Dan Barabino raised his hand, but he didn't post a question. So I'm allowing him to talk. Where did he go?
All right.
Dan, are you there? See if that happens. Ask to unmute.
I am here. I didn't, but I appreciate it. I didn't really mean to raise my hand. And I have 100 questions, but let me just, I think, well, what I'd like to hear a little bit more about is AI and how you think AI is going to impact not just sales and marketing, right? Because what we talked about, well, you talked about early on is how sort of our whole R&D infrastructure is being turned upside down. And I think AI has a significant part of that in addition to the sales and marketing. So maybe I'd like to hear a little bit about kind of where you see AI fitting into our drug discovery and development process, and how can we, as providers to that space, how can we take advantage of that?
Yeah, great
Thanks,
question.
Daniel.
Yeah, great question. So I don't know if the audience heard the question or not, but I heard it. It was very low. And the question was about like what is the force function here about AI? Like what is AI? What is the role of AI, and what is the kind of the implications of AI? So here's the thing. I believe that things are never ever again going to take as long as they are today, and they're not and are going to cost as much as they are today. Like we're kind of at the peak of doing things manually. We've reached that peak. And now we can't afford to not look at AI to automate and speed. I can tell you from an investment perspective. So in 2024, if there was an AI in a pitch deck in the life sciences, on average, the valuation was up by 12%. And that's an average, the mean. So that is just like those two letters created 12% extra value. And that's in 2024.
Perceived value.
Yeah,
Just to be clear.
never mind that often it's conflating AI and machine learning, but
I was not in any of those pitches, but that is an outcome.
Yeah.
And I also think that the data that we've been watching AI and machine learning and how they've been coming into the US, into the life sciences and research, and how excited the research community is. So in our State of Science twice a year, again, we ask this question: And it really went from 5th place in 2022 to 1st place in 2025. Like that, I mean, you can just see it rise. And there was actually, and we do differentiate between machine learning and artificial intelligence. One is generative, one is not. And both of them have been rising. And so the research community understands that. Interestingly, after you get out of the funding woes and, you know, whatever, the top barriers to these people meeting their goal at the end of the year are the reproducibility issue and inflated expectations of AI. So those are two. Nothing is scientific here. Everything is sort of like social science that's happening. That's really keeping things from moving forward. So biology is complex, but the reproducibility issue hasn't done anybody any favors, and it still maintains as a big problem. And so AI could potentially solve that, or at least get much farther into solving that. What we heard a lot in the surveys that we've done is that really looking to AI first to generate better hypotheses, better experimental plans, and then being much more focused. So again, that's part of the prioritization, is looking at how we're implementing AI. So it's all there. You asked about sales and marketing. I don't want to continue to dominate, so I'll pass it over to you and see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, you know, I think we also have to look at some of the other costs of AI, right? I mean, it is a massive infrastructure investment that we don't quite have yet in the United States. It's currently really been a handful of large corporate investments. We don't really have the public backbone of that infrastructure. It's not available publicly, it's private corporations. And so I do see a lot of companies that are sort of building technology on the backbone of technology that they don't own, that they don't control, that they don't even have a piece of or hope of. And even if that pricing model changes, you know, their entire pricing model changes, and there's a big domino effect. And I see that in a lot of the startup community right now. That's an issue. The other thing is the environmental cost. You know, a lot of life sciences is in that environmental side, and we don't currently have enough energy right now to power everything that we would need in the United States in order to truly integrate AI broadly across, I mean, never mind life sciences, just, you know, any sector really. And so I think we do have to think long and hard about how we build AI, that backbone that AI is going to live on, and the fundamental technologies that underlie it, so that it is not just concentrated in the hands of a handful of corporations. And you see other countries investing in that backbone infrastructure, and the US hasn't quite kept pace with that. And so I'd like to see a little bit more of that and a little bit more of this public infrastructure before we see companies just all piling on that bandwagon, because the implications of just those pricing model changes, like I said, could be seismic for them. And then my last point here too is, or my question for you guys, did you see that Moderna has announced that they have combined their HR and technology tools department with a big fundamental shift around utilizing AI there. And I don't know if either of you work with Moderna, so if you know, comment if you necessary. But you know, I think that there's innovation in this space, I think, that's yet to be had, and it'll be interesting to see you know, how that's going to shape how internal decisions are made, how hiring decisions are made, whether it is more effective and efficient, or whether it dehumanizes the process. And I think that there are great social science arguments on both sides. So it's an interesting experiment that we're all watching live from that perspective.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, this is something that I said on LinkedIn, and so my mouth cashed it. My mouth wrote a check. I hope that we all cash it here, or I'm going to cash it. But one is, anybody who's going to tell you what to do in this situation, really, you should look at them with skepticism. I don't know what is happening. And this is no disrespect to my colleagues here or any of you, but nobody has seen this before, right? It's a confluence of a bunch of things. But there are a few sort of laws of nature that you can protract that out, and then there's a discrete set of outcomes that will come out of this. So I'll piggyback on what you said about access to AI. I think AI's capability is one thing, access to it is another. So I'm quoting someone else here, but 90% of all the chips that are manufactured that run AI in the entire world are manufactured in one city in China. Or I'm sorry, in Taiwan. One city. And that's actually the good news. The bad news is that the minerals that are required to build that chip come from 8 or 9 different countries. And so you absolutely need global participation to make this thing into a reality. The fact that we can get it for free or for $20 a month or whatever it is, and then we're building all these tools on top of it. Imagine a world where the government decides what the priority is for AI, and then they put 100% of that focus there. Let's say this administration cares about, I don't know, energy. That's what AI is going to happen because that's who's going to be in control of it because we don't have enough. We don't have enough AI. That is a reality that we have to think about. And so by building, to your point, by building the entire pipeline of pharma on the assumption that AI is like free or cheaply available may come into question. But today it's free or cheap,
Yes.
you know? And so developing it and leveraging that and getting as far as fast as you can is actually like the right thing to do, you know? And then if access becomes an issue, the environmental issue, I totally agree with you. I don't have an answer there, but it is absolutely an issue. So.
Interesting times, Chris.
Yeah. Do we have, I mean, it's 10:56. We have a couple minutes. You guys want to wrap up, or I can give you one more question about C-level executives navigating this and thinking about guiding their
Yeah,
teams?
let's talk
Is
to
that
Yeah,
them.
good?
my hope is that the people who are investing their hour get as much as possible. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the question is specifically, what advice would you give C-level executives navigating this period of uncertainty? How should they be thinking about their role guiding teams, sustaining innovation? There's a lot here, communicating internally and externally when everything is, as you've described, sort of out of control and unpredictable.
Clean up your balance sheet. Make sure you have a very clean balance sheet because you might need to get additional investment. You also might be an acquisition target potentially. I mean, there are lots of exits, right, that are happening right now or that could happen in the near future. And so I think keeping a clean balance sheet needs to be a priority. Not taking on more debt, for example, than you can handle. And I don't see, because money, cash has been so cheap in the last decade, I do see more exec teams kind of going back to the well, so to speak, of their venture capital investors, especially private equity investors, time and again, because the borrowing rates have been low and they've been able to do that. I think you need to be very disciplined in this moment. That doesn't mean stop spending, but I do think it means keep your balance sheet clean so that if you need to be acquired or if there's an acquisition target that's appealing to you, making sure that you'd be able to take on the debt that you would need in order to bring on that company if you don't have cash. You made the cash comment earlier, and I think it's very important right now to make sure that there's enough cash balance as well in your company because we are seeing companies that are just getting paid later. Right? They're getting their receivables later. And that just means you need more cash on hand and you might not be able to take that out in a line of credit or go back to the well, so to speak. So I think that discipline is going to be very important. And then the other piece, we talked about this earlier around talent acquisition. This can be a real opportunity, I think, for C-levels to bring on that CSO hire that they haven't been able to find. Even in sales and marketing, I think we're going to see agencies go away. We're already seeing it a little bit, and that doesn't mean that there isn't talent there. And so if you're an internal, marketing or sales department lead listening to this, I think that is an opportunity for you to find really great sales and marketing talent that maybe wasn't available to you before. And then just lastly, this is a time, like we said, that you can make or break your brand. And so really thinking about how your company is presenting itself, not going away from industry events. Maybe you don't get the 40 by 40 foot booth this year, right? Maybe you scale back because foot traffic likely isn't as important as having those roundtable discussions, bringing value at the podium and in the poster presentation. So I think you just have to kind of rethink your marketing strategy a little bit along those lines.
yeah. So I underline all of those. I think that the companies of the future have three things. that they need to really either shore up or get. So the first one is technology IP. They need some sort of an IP. They also need brand, because that's the and we have to rephrase that because brand is so sort of passé and cheesy. But let's just say if we're no longer taking for anything for granted, we also have to not take trust for granted.
Trust, yeah.
Right? And so that's what brand means. So you need to generate trust, however. And then the third one is you need to have a secret. That is not your IP. Is your secret about how your market acts and how they might react. Those are the companies that are growing right now. Is that they have all three. So you need some product that delivers value somehow, or service. You need a brand that connects with these audiences and they trust you. And you need a secret about how that market is going to react. If you don't have all three of those, you're in with the masses. And good luck. If you have all three of those, then you are one of the ones that are going to be spiking out and you're going to be a leader of the future.
Absolutely.
So go get yourself some market insights. I hate to say it, but go get yourself some market insights. That's what's going to form that secret.
That doesn't mean go buy a secondary market research report.
That's not a secret.
From...
That's not a secret.
Right,
That's
yes.
a transaction.
Please don't take that as, yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Those are important, but that's
Yes.
not a secret.
Absolutely.
Right? You need a secret that only you own.
Awesome. What a great. I'll just say that I feel incredibly lucky to be sitting here, just essentially showering in marketing and business wisdom with these two. So Elizabeth Schaub and Hamid Ghanadon. This is awesome. Thank you both so much, and thank you everybody for attending. So, and there will be a recording available. I will put this out on my podcast. These guys will share it as well.
Yeah. Really appreciate everyone who spent the hour with us. This is really meaningful to me, and thank you for coming here. Thank you for coming here. And I'm lucky because I get to treat these two to lunch now. So
Awesome. And we're lucky
Yeah.
because we get to go eat lunch.
There
And
you
go.
Starbucks.
There's that.
This is great. Thanks so much.
thank you, Chris.
Yeah, my pleasure. I guess.